Hello, everyone. I'm gonna just wait a couple of seconds as people sign in. It's good to see you, Tal and Nadav.
Hi. Hi. Good to
We will.
be here.
It's good to have you. It's good to have you back. We like to have you in person, but as we are
Mhm.
in this virtual environment, it's nice to have you in virtual environment as well. And Nadav, I can welcome you, but I'll also welcome you when we really start.
I'll hold my breath.
Hold your breath. Yeah. And in the meantime, everyone can continue watching CNN and see what's happening. Okay. So I still see people logging in, but I think we will get started because there's a lot to talk about. My name is Adina Vogel Ayalon. I am J Street's chief of staff, currently based in Israel. And we are here today with Tal Schneider, and distinguished journalist, and Nadav Tamir, the new executive director of J Street in Israel. And it's really a privilege to have both of you here. And I think it's quite a fascinating day to be having a webinar on Israeli politics. There's a lot going on here, but as we know, there's a lot going on in the United States. Not only do we have the results of the Georgia runoff, but the Congress is currently certifying the Electoral College votes today. And I know that both of our speakers have that on in the background. And what would usually have been an uneventful process is now sure to be full of debates on baseless claims of election fraud. But in the end, President-elect Joe Biden, his electoral college victory will be certified. And we also continue to await the final tallies. But it is clear that J Street endorsees Reverend Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff have both won their critical Georgia Senate runoffs. And we are very proud to have played our part in these victories. And I know that as the results from Georgia came in today, all of us here are probably feeling quite elated. The political goals that J Street set out to attain 4 years ago have actually been achieved today, and it took some time to get there, but we are there. It's a new day for democracy and progress in the United States, and it's also a new day for the U.S.-Israel relationship. All of us here in Israel, on a certain side of the political map, are hoping to one day wake up to a feeling like this on our own elections, and to feel that the tides are changing and that there's hope on the horizon. And today we have that opportunity to sort of dive into the current political reality in Israel with two great experts. And I joked with them that both of them could actually be doing a webinar right now in Hebrew for Israelis about what's happening today in the US political events. But we are lucky to have them both here with us to lay out what's going on in Israel, what has happened up until this point, what to expect as we lead up to another round of elections, and also how this impacts J Street's work. So I'll take a moment to introduce you to our speakers, and I also get to congratulate both of them on their new positions. So Tal Schneider is a friend and frequent guest a speaker for J Street, and she has recently become the diplomatic and political correspondent for the Times of Israel. I know that probably all of our viewers are familiar, and this is very, very exciting. She was a former DC correspondent for Ma'ariv Daily, also Globe's business newspaper's political and diplomatic correspondent, and also a political blogger running her own political blog. She is a frequent commentator on Israeli radio and TV, a recipient of the Ometz Public Courage and Integrity Award and the 2012 Google Digital Excellence in Journalism Award. And she's also a lecturer and public speaker in Jewish communities across the United States. And we've had the privilege of hosting her in our communities in the United States. And we also have with us, welcome, Tal, happy to have you here. And we also have
I
Nadav.
even managed to do J Street in 2020, which is amazing.
It is amazing. That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. Right before. Back
in February, right? Yeah.
And we also have with us Nadav, who, as I said, is J Street Israel's new executive director. Prior to joining J Street, Nadav served as the senior policy advisor to the president of Israel, Shimon Peres. He also has an extensive career as an Israeli diplomat. He was a former consul general of New England, served as a policy assistant to 3 Israeli foreign ministers, and as an advisor to the director general at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In 2003, he was chosen as a Wexner Fellow and earned his master's in public administration from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. And he is also currently on the steering committee of the Geneva Initiative and the board of Mitvim, the Israeli Institute for Regional Foreign Policies, and also a senior advisor for governmental and international affairs at the Paris Center for Peace. And so, Nadav, it's a privilege to have you on this webinar in your new capacity.
It's great to be in J Street now, not only as a gig, but as kind of my day job. I'm so happy to, and actually we can't have a better timing to get into J Street than, you know, what's happening now in the US.
So true. So what we will do, we'll start with a moderated conversation. I'm telling our viewers, please encourage you to put your questions into the Q&A box, and we will have time at the end of the discussion to touch on some of the questions. I'm sure there will be lots and lots of questions. And so thank you everyone for being with us today on a very significant day in the US, but also there's, you know, as I mentioned, a lot going on, and Tal and Nadav will fill us all in. So I will turn first to Tal. I would love for you to just start off with giving us an understanding of how we got here after just 7 months of the Gantz-Netanyahu coalition agreement, which I will note obviously did start on shaky ground, but now we are heading back to the polls at the end of March. Please tell us how we got here, what to expect, what's happened. Maybe if you can just give a quick overview. A lot has happened in a couple of weeks of the different shifts in political parties, individuals, new parties. Just sort of walk us through all of it.
Okay, so first, thank you for being here. Thank you for inviting me to be here. I started to say earlier that I actually managed to do one J Street, I think maybe one or two events while I was in New Hampshire and Iowa back in February. Probably my last big traveling. It was February, and I managed to be in the United States for 16 days, but that's it. So one of them was J Street. It was great. So I'm really again nice to be here again with you. How did we get here? While you were in election in the United States, Israel, I don't know if you were following up, but Israel is having its 4th election cycle in 2 years, in less than 2 years. Our next election is on March 23rd, and we already had 3 of them. And we can't really guarantee you that we're going to have a nice outcome out of this election. So we might, you know, end up having a 5th, or I don't know how many more. The latest in development here was the Israel budget. Israel usually operates under a yearly budget. The budget it's a huge bill, and it has to be approved by both the government and the Knesset, the parliament. And during 2019, because of the election cycle, the parliament, the Knesset, they didn't approve a budget. And the first mission of the so-called unity government, was to approve a budget. But because of the fights between Netanyahu and Gantz from the first day of the coalition, they didn't approve the budget. Now in Israel, when you don't approve a budget, the Knesset automatically dissolves, automatically. And indeed, they had some negotiation and they were trying to get it done, but really, the major infringement was on behalf of the prime minister, because Netanyahu promised to Gantz, and it was promised in writing. It wasn't just promised on air. It was promised in writing in an agreement that he will pass the budget together with the next year budget. It didn't happen. The reason for that, obviously, is because Netanyahu was actually planning. That's what we think as analysts. He was planning to avoid the budget, because once you avoid the budget, you are letting the Knesset to be dissolved automatically, as I said. And in that way, he is avoiding letting Benny Gantz to become the prime minister according to the coalition agreement. So the coalition agreement was that each side take half of the term, 18 months and 18 months. And Netanyahu was just maneuvering his way around to infringe the agreement and also to avoid the budget and also to avoid giving Gantz the ability to become a prime minister. And with that, we had a government of seven or 8 months, and we are heading to the next election. It is maybe one of the first time in the history that the Knesset dissolves out of not having a budget, which meant that elections are automatically 90 days after the dissolvement, which is March 23rd. And that's it. Under the pandemic, under a third lockdown. So it's like the fourth election, the third big lockdown, which will start tomorrow night at midnight. A grave economic situation. I don't have to explain to you all of this. The situation is really dire here at the moment.
Thanks, Tal. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the shifts in the new map of the political players and the parties that will be competing in the elections, and also what exactly this new evolving political map means for the future of the left and center left in Israel?
Right. Each election has its own, nuance events, but the fourth time will be the time on which Netanyahu is going to have a challenger from the right wing. So Gideon Saar, a top Likud minister who was the interior minister and the education minister, stepped out of the Likud about a month ago and announced that he is starting his own political party. And he's challenging Netanyahu from the right wing, which means all of his agenda, all of his policy is much more to the right of Netanyahu. And he has a really strong record being a right-wing person through his, the years that he was a minister, the years that he was in the Knesset, all of his political activism since early childhood, since early teenagerhood, actually, is really very much to the right wing. For example, he opposed the disengagement of 2005. Netanyahu, as you all may know, voted for the disengagement in 3 of the votes, and only in the 4th last vote, he actually remembered that he wants to object, but he kind of helped to promote the disengagement. Gideon Saar, on the other hand, was voting against it. So this is just one example, but he has kind of a harsh right-wing track record of foreigners that live in the country, on the judicial system, on heritage, on the occupied territories, and so on. And he's challenging Netanyahu from the right wing. So this is the first time that someone from the top Likud ranks, Gideon Saar, who is, by the way, he's around 54. He's from Tel Aviv, and he is married to a very famous TV anchor. So he's kind of young and hip, if you can call politician hip, but comparing to Netanyahu, he's from the from the heart of the country. He's very well connected with media and so on, and but he's a very right-wing guy. And since he started his own party about a month ago, he has already managed to pull away from the Likud ranks another minister, Ze'ev Elkin, very right-wing guy. The two of them with another group of other people, all are coming from within the Likud. Now they have between 18 to 19 seats. The Likud is around 27 to 30. So 18 and 19 seems a little bit low for someone who wants to become a prime minister, but because he may be able to form a government. So when we see the polls, he is, according to now, able to form a government with many other players while the Likud is outside of this future government. So even if the Likud brings in 30 seats, Gideon Sa'ar might be able to form a government with blue and white remains, Benny Gantz, Yair Lapid, another new party by Ron Huldai, the mayor of Tel Aviv, and so on. I will not give all the details right now, but it seems that there is a possibility to form a government without the Likud, and that's something that we didn't see here for many years. So.
But I want to just sort of push you a little bit further. Do you see anyone within the center or the center left? If you can just touch on what's happening there. Is there anyone notable that you think we should be watching? I know there are a few parties that have been developed that you mentioned, of course, Ron Huldai and Ofer Shelach. Dani Atom also came out with a new party today. So I'm just wondering if you see, how do you see that shaping up? What's happening with Avodah, the Labor Party? Can you tell us if you see any room for potential mergers, or what does this really mean for those? I know elections become Bibi not Bibi, but there is also ideology involved, and I'm curious if you can tell our viewers where things stand in that regard.
So right now, nobody from the left declared himself as a possible prime minister. The only person who declared himself as a prime minister candidate is Yair Lapid, who is center-left. Yair Lapid is currently the head of opposition, which, as you know, it's an important role in Israel. But being a head of opposition should have brought him to be more popular or more with bigger numbers, but he is, for some reason, we don't really understand why, but for some reason he is unable to attract more votes, attract more voters, and gain more sim. So Lapid is probably a candidate for foreign minister or so, if he will be in the group that will enter the coalition, which I suppose he will. And now the center left is very split into, as you mentioned, Ron Huldai, the very successful mayor of Tel Aviv. He's been a mayor for 22 years and is very, very popular. He's 76 years old. He was also Navy combative pilot back in the days. And I think he left the army in a high rank, and then he served for many years as a school administrator. Not a school administrator, he's a manager of a very popular school in Tel Aviv. Then he ran for the mayor and he won, and it's been 22 years as a mayor. So he has like this amazing history, a personal history of both military, educational, and running the biggest and not the biggest, the second biggest city, but maybe the second important city in Israel, Tel Aviv, which is it's a major hub, and is very popular, as I said. And what we see, Ron, his first name is Ron, R-O-N. He was an active member of the Labor for many years. I mean, he showed up in Labor conferences and he was on the stage and he was debating agenda. He was very active in the party. But the Labor has just, it's vanished. It's gone. It's the leader now of the Labor is the former Defense Minister Amir Peretz, who is really the party is totally trashed after they went into government with Netanyahu. And Ron Huldai, what he did, he brought in the former Justice Minister Avi Nissan-Cohen, also a Labor member, a very known used to be Labor member, also the former chief of the unions in Israel, the worker union, some sort of an organization here that it's like the AFL-CIO, right? It's the same type of organization. So he was the chair. It's a huge, in Israel, it's a huge economic power to stand in the head of that organization. He's going to be number two. So the two first, people on the list are Labor people. So this is actually, we feel this is like the Labor. It's not the Labor with the name. They call themselves the Israelis, which is funny because everybody here are Israelis. So But the party is liberal left, secular, and probably, Tel Aviv kind of type of party. I don't know how many seats it can get. They are now announced that they'll go 50-50 with women, and they have other nice ideas, probably LGBT community and some green communities and so on. But they are not enough in the polls to be the first or to be anywhere as prime minister candidates. But they can definitely sit in the coalition with Gideon Sa'ar. Another person who declares himself as a candidate material and someone who is trying to be a prime minister is Naftali Bennett, the former defense minister, former education minister. He is from the very far right wing. The party called Yemina. It's on the remains or whatever is left from the Mafdal, the historic Mafdal. Naftali Bennett is religious, pro-settlers, pro-annexation, but his own personal behavior is more liberal than we remember back in the days. So obviously with the kippah and everything, but more open to modern life. And he had kind of a good year. I put it in quotation mark because he was left in the opposition by the unity government. But during the summer, for example, when Netanyahu was talking annexation, Naftali Bennett, who annexation must be his own personal ticket, he kept saying, I don't care about annexation these days. I only care about the pandemic. I only care about businesses, about people that are not making money, and about the sick and the education system and so on. So he was very much behaving like a leader you would expect, who would put aside something that is not on the top of the list at the moment and will focus on the regular people. And this kind of gave him a lot of steam. He was over 20 in the polls just until the minute when Gideon Sa'ar left the Likud and Gideon Sa'ar kind of stole the energy from him. And now Bennett is around 13 to 12 seats, where Gideon Sa'ar is on 19 seats. And those two together can cooperate and bypass the Likud, work with Yair Lapid, work with Victor Lieberman, work with Ron Childai, and actually form a government that will be sort of, it's like the Never Trumpers, right? It's anything but Bibi. We call it here Rak Lo Bibi, RLB. Rak Lo Bibi, it's the same as the Never Trumpers. You want to do everything, but not Bibi. This is what's the atmosphere at the political sphere at the moment here.
Thanks for expanding on that more. So I want to turn to you, Nadav, for you to help us understand what this reshuffling of the political parties and players and everything that Tal just laid out, what do you think this means for the impact on the relationship between the US and Israel and the American Jewish community?
Well, the good news is that maybe Netanyahu is getting off the stage. Netanyahu was very effective in working against the J Street agenda. And, we have a lot of criticism about him as a statesman, but as a politician, he's brilliant. Nobody can deny it. And he was able to also influence the public in Israel. And with his symbiosis with Trump, he actually made Likud into a kind of a populist party, somewhat similar to what happened to the Republican Party. That now Sa'ar and others want to take Likud to the old kind of Likud, not corrupted, not populist, still very much right-wing. So the good news is that maybe Netanyahu will be off the stage, also, of course, because of his legal issues, and that can open new opportunities. Of course, the bad news is that there is no real leadership on the left, and it seems that the alternatives are also right-wing. But I think that it gives a lot of, opportunities for the Biden administration. If you go back to history, when America really made a significant impact on the peace process, think of Carter working with Begin, who is the old style kind of Likudnik, very right-wing, but decent, and thinking about the state and not about his own situation. And Carter took advantage of the Sadat willingness to go for peace and actually brought Begin into a peace process that changed dramatically the Israeli strategic situation. Peace with the largest and strongest Arab country in the world that used to be our nemesis. Another example is the Bush first administration, Bush 41, when Baker
I'll just give a second, I think, for Nadav's internet to sort itself out.
I'm still here.
I know you're here, but I'm gonna turn back to you.
Was I frozen?
I think, yeah, you cut out for a little bit. Yeah.
So I'm going back to the second example, which is in the Bush first administration, when Baker, a very effective foreign minister, was able to use a new kind of opening because of the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviets, because of the successful first Gulf War that gave him kind of a new coalition in the Middle East. And he dragged Shamir, a very hard-line Likudnik, to the Madrid conference that actually opened diplomatic relations for Israel in China and India and many other places, and eventually also led to Oslo. So actually, maybe even though those new partners are very right-wing, something can be done with American leadership. Now, another thing to pay attention to is what's happening with the Arab constituencies in Israel. Very, very interesting changes. We see for the first time kind of Netanyahu is trying to actually court the Arabs, and he has some kind of a special relations with one of the factions of the Arab Joint List. The Arab Joint List, people don't realize it, is comprised of very different forces. Communists on the one hand, nationalists on the other hand, and Islamists on the third. And actually the Islamist party, against all expectations, became very close to Netanyahu. And that changed the whole kind of dynamic. And the reasons for that, I think, are several. One of them is kind of because people gave up on the two-state solution. So the Arab is thinking, okay, in a one-state solution, eventually we will be a majority demographically. Right now, we need to go for money, for jobs, for opportunities, and give up the national cause and just work with demography, which means we can work with Netanyahu. The second one is that there is actually some kind of a coalition between the populists, Muslim populists, and the Jewish populists, because both of they're all against gay rights, against women's rights. They're very right-wing in some of their kind of values. So actually there is a connection. And the third reason is what happened with the Abrahamic Accords, because the Abrahamic Accords all of a sudden made Arabs kind of romantic again. If for many years Israelis saw, most Israelis, not us of course, but many Israelis saw Arabs as the enemy, as the foreign, as the threat, all of a sudden Israelis are going to Dubai and are so happy to get kind of into the Arab culture, and more Israelis are studying Arabic. And Netanyahu felt it because he always feeling is very good at that. And he understood that maybe there is a change in how people perceive Arabs. The biggest symbol in Israeli soccer, Beitar Jerusalem, which is a fascist Jewish supremacy kind of culture team, was bought by a millionaire from Dubai. So there is a change that also changes kind of the connection between Jews and Arabs. And for us on the left, it's a great example that if the right-wingers, Islamists and ultra-Orthodox and nationalists can join, also we, the liberals, could join with liberal Arabs and put aside the narratives and the national story and work together for the same values that we believe in.
Thanks, Nadav. Tal, I want to ask you to sort of expand on that topic of Jewish-Arab political partnerships, and Nadav gave us a sense of what's happening on the right. Can you give us a sense also of what's happening on the left? And we also had a question from one of our viewers about any potential opportunity for unification on the left between Meretz and the joint list, or parts of it. What's feasible? If you could sort of give us an overview of how that dynamic of Jewish-Arab partnerships is playing out.
So Meretz, the outgoing Knesset, they have 3 seats only. What happened with Meretz was they were under a huge public pressure to join forces with the labor, with the Avodah, in order to pass the threshold. You know, the threshold is very high in Israel, and they joined forces, and labor was coming into the Knesset together with another party called Gesher by Orly Levy, who was just moving from a party to party. And she joined forces with Amir Peretz. I don't want to get into all the details, but because of all of those combinations, Meretz was left with only 3 people in the current Knesset. And that is devastating to them. And they had actually a press conference 2 days ago. Nitzan Horowitz, the chairman, said, I learned my lesson. I brought in the labor and Orly Levy on my back. And those guys, they just stabbed me in the back, and they went in to join Netanyahu's coalition, because they left the joint forces. They broke up after the election, and the other group just joined into the government. And he said, this was hurtful, and my feelings were hurt, and I was devastated. The thought that I made Meretz voters to, in a back channel support Netanyahu, it's just unbelievable to me. So I'm not doing this anymore. And what he's doing right now is Meretz and Nitzan Horowitz. He's doing, he called it Shutfut Yehudit Aravit, so partnership between Jewish and Arabs. They presented the party list for the Knesset, and they have at the first 3 spots, they have the top of the party, but then on the 4th and on the 5th, they put 2 Arabs. One is a very known Meretz member, Sawi Fridge, and the other one is a new woman who is an Arab, Muslim Arab, Raida Zoabi. She will be number 4. So if you're looking for a partnership, a party that has both groups of the Israel society inside, it's Meretz, because the joint Arab list has only 1 Jewish member. The rest of them are Arabs. The rest of the parties will maybe put on their list 1 or 2 people, that's it. And I think these days what we're talking is every list, including Gideon Sa'ar list, and even Bennett, even on the right wing, they are looking for a representative of the Arab society. To my opinion, I mean, even the Likud. So the Likud went from Aravim Noarim, the Arabs voters are moving in hordes to change the election in 2015. And now everybody's laughing that Netanyahu is moving in hordes himself to the Arab villages in order to look for Arab voters. Netanyahu actually claims that he made some polls and he can get between 1 to 2 seats from the Arab society, and therefore he's looking for an Arab Muslim in his list. It's not enough in Israel. It's not enough to have a Druze member, because what you want to do is you want to look for the Muslims. We have 21% Arab population in Israel. So 1 out of 5 Israeli, 1 at least is an Arab, and most of them, somewhat around 19% are Muslims. So if one wants to talk to the Arab society, he must talk to the Muslim society. Talking to the Druze and to the Christians is not enough, because they are just 1%. And when you're looking for an Arab member, I think Netanyahu, for example, this is something that I published in the Times of Israel yesterday or 2 days ago. He chose administrator of a school up in the north, who probably might be his is the person in his list. We don't know what is the position, but also Gideon Saar is negotiating with an Arab woman. He didn't want to tell me her name, but I know that he was negotiating with her. Yair Lapid is looking for an Arab name. He had a Druze in his list, but she stepped down today. Actually, very impressive woman. You maybe want to have her in J Street one of those days. Her fight was against the national Chok HaLeom, the national basic law. She was fighting against. Yeah, she's very impressive, very, very impressive and elegant and smart. And I was very sorry to hear today that she's stepping out and she's not going to pay. So Yair Lapid doesn't have anyone at the moment. And obviously, Ron Huldai will definitely look for someone. So the outcome from Netanyahu negotiating with like Nadav said, Netanyahu is negotiating with the Islamist movement, with Mansour Abbas. The outcome is that now everybody wants to have Arabs on their list. I call it the year of the Arab, which is, reference to the year of the woman that you have in DC, but I'm just kidding. I don't know. I mean, it's a good outcome, but we don't know. I don't know if the Arab will be in the coalition, because when it came to be part of the coalition, there was a setback. I mean, not even in the coalition. The Joint Arab List didn't even talk about being part of the coalition. All they wanted is to maybe help form a different government, and that could have happened in exchange to some budget considerations or maybe jobs in the Knesset. So some sort of negotiation. And for that, they went very far on their behalf and recommended Benny Gantz, only to find out that Benny Gantz is stepping in with Netanyahu. So that was devastating for them. And when I talked today to some of my friends in the Arab society, and I asked them, like I met today a person who I'm working with on something that is not politics. And I asked them, did you vote? And he said, I never voted. This is a person at the age of 40 or so. He said, I never voted in my life. The only time I decided to vote is when I saw all of those parties sit together, and I said to myself, okay, this is a good reason to support them. So he went out and voted, and he told me today that if Mahmoud Abbas is keeping on working with Netanyahu, he will not vote for the Joint Arab List because he doesn't want to have anything with Netanyahu. So that's crazy stuff.
Speaking of crazy stuff, I'm getting notifications, and you're probably also seeing it on the background of your screen.
Yeah, I'm like, my WhatsApp here is going crazy.
Yeah, that there are protesters in the Capitol, and there are questions actually that have been coming in the Q&A, and I'm going to shift gears for a moment just to acknowledge this very troubling moment, there was a question specifically if Israelis are sort of conscious to the events that are happening in the United States at the moment and the threat to American democracy. And then also a question about how will Trump's failure in the US election and the subsequent efforts to reject the results of the legitimate election after the Israeli election, and particularly Netanyahu's fortunes, having tied himself so explicitly to Trump, how will Netanyahu position himself vis-a-vis the new Biden administration in the early months of the administration before the election? So two different questions, one about the public awareness here of the situation in the United States, and also how Netanyahu will position himself. So I'll turn to Nadav for you to touch on that, and then Tal, you can also expand.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, what's happened in the US, and I'm not talking about what you see on the TV screens, but the big picture is that Trump lost, and the Trumpism lost. It's true, 74 million people voted for Trump, but it did not win, and all the conspiracy theories eventually were not, accepted, even with the very conservative judges that he put in all federal courts. And so I think that's a very important message for Israel, because Netanyahu in many ways is playing the same thing. You know, the media is against me, the legal system is against me. So the failure of Trump is a very important message to the Israeli politics. And also, one of the things that worked for Netanyahu is that he has these amazing relations with the most important leader in the world, with Trump. And now this thing was taken out of him. Now, Israelis were not paying attention to Georgia until maybe yesterday. But actually, the fact that the Republicans lost Senate is also huge for Netanyahu, because Netanyahu was always a great player in American Congress against, you know, if he doesn't like the president like he did with Obama. And now he lost a very important lever when the Republicans are not controlling Senate. So I think this is a very, very strong message to Israelis, and will also affect how Netanyahu is being perceived. Now, it is also true that in this lame duck period, the Trump administration is still trying to affect things on the ground with a lot of coordination, of course, with Netanyahu. We saw the Pompeo visit to Israel, announcing all kinds of things that I call it poisoned gifts, living poison gifts. I don't know if it's actually coordinated with Trump. It might be actually Pompeo's own campaign to become a senator in Kansas and getting the base, the evangelicals, to support him. But we still see that Netanyahu is working with the Trump administration, even after we know that Biden is going to get into the White House. And we also heard some messages from Netanyahu, from Dermer, the ambassador in Washington, about the going back to the JCPOA, the intention of the Biden administration to go back to the agreement between Iran and the P5+1, which is definitely going to be the first thing, the first kind of conflict, because the Biden administration already announced that the first thing on the priority is to go back to the JCPOA, compliance for compliance. And for Netanyahu, it's something that he put all his career on working against diplomacy with Iran. So they're going to be clashed, but eventually, I think Netanyahu will have to understand that there is a new situation. Of course, with the election and everything, it's very chaotic, and nobody's thinking about statesmanship in Israel right now. They only think about political survival. So Netanyahu will actually look in the polls to see whether it's good for him to be with Biden or not, rather than what's good for the state. So it's going to be very, very tough. But I think that the fact that smart diplomacy is going back to Washington, it means that there are some things that Biden can do with or without Netanyahu by choreographing the regional story in a much smarter way than Trump did. So I'm actually optimistic that with everything that is going on in Israel, I think the Biden administration can still make an impact on the things that we care about in J Street.
Thanks, Nadav. I'm going to shift gears to a different topic, which is a few different questions that have come up in the Q&A about what all of this means for Palestinians in the West Bank. How does this, and in Gaza, how does this impact the issue, of course, that is so important to J Street, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and of course, the coalition that you laid out, the non-Bibi coalition. How do you see that coalition addressing de facto annexation efforts, which we know are continuing while de jure annexation has been at least on hold for the moment? How do you see these elections and sort of what you laid out as a potential scenario for a coalition impacting that issue?
First, let me take it from what Nadav just said about how the Trump administration is still continuing to work. You probably should know or may know that as we speak right now, the finance minister of the United States, Mnuchin, is doing his way from Sudan to Israel. And they are now in the stages of, finalizing some sort of an understanding, or another step in the normalization between Israel and Sudan, which is good. I mean, it's good. It's those things that are happening. I mean, maybe during the craziest time when we have all of our elections, and you have such crazy election and such events unfolding, and that unbelievable and unprecedented event unfolding as we speak right now. During that time, we have maybe some amazing developments in the region with the UAE and Sudan and Morocco and Bahrain. So, I mean, it's like living between those two extremes of developments. As per the Palestinians, I think also the huge developments in the Arab world shed a light about something that is troubling for them, and maybe for us as well, because you do see the Arab world moving ahead with Egypt consent, with Saudi Arabia consent, and they give a lip service, to my opinion, to the Palestinian issue, but really they are tired of waiting, and they're not waiting for them anymore. And the Israeli public is not stupid. They see that, they hear that, and they understand that actually nobody is really on the side of the Palestinians anymore. I mean, almost nobody. It doesn't seem like a good situation. So 2020 may be the worst year for the entire humanity, I don't know, with respect to health, but also it's a very bad year for the Palestinians. And if you talk about the diplomatic front, I think that, by the way, there was a news today that Israel actually delivered some vaccinations to the Palestinian Authority. So we do see this cooperation between Israel and the Palestinian Authority going on at all times. It's just hidden. It's a shame that it's hidden, because people to people should be more able to do things. Vaccinations, and then back in the winter, last winter, Israel provided those machines to fight the COVID. I forget the name of those machines. Remember when the pandemic began, everybody needed those hospitals to be
the ventilator.
Yeah, exactly. So Israel actually provided that as well. So it's not all dark and negative. It's just the big question is, how do you get out of this situation? And I do think that the Palestinians will probably make a gesture on Biden's arrival, and they will stop the boycott or we don't talk to you and this kind of stuff. They will start talking again. And if the Biden administration, if that's going to be on any priority list, I don't know, I'm not sure. I think Iran is more on the top of the list for the Biden administration than the Palestinians. But if the Palestinians will come back to the priority list, and if the Palestinians will go back into discourse with the American administration, then one thing we know is that the Prime Minister Netanyahu stood next to Trump and endorsed a plan according to which the Palestinians have a state on 70% of the land. So Netanyahu endorsed it. It was on TV, and that's maybe a start. That maybe someone in the United States in the new administration shouldn't just throw that away. I mean, Trump used to throw away everything Obama did, right? But maybe the Biden should take that plan and say, okay, maybe that's something. We could start maybe work from this direction, because we already have the endorsement of the Israeli leader and the Israeli people. I mean, Netanyahu endorsed it, but also Benny Gantz endorsed it, and also, once Netanyahu endorsed it, it was kind of a consensus here. Not everybody, of course, but not Bennett, but some left and center, and the right wing presented by Netanyahu. So maybe that's a start.
Nadav, did you want to add something? I was going to switch gears to a different.
No, actually, I have a lot to say about this question, but should I, or should we move to another one?
No, please. I'll throw out the next thing that I did, because we just gotten a few questions about it, just trying to understand. Well, there's two things that we've gotten several questions about. One is specifically what is happening with Benny Gantz. What is his role? Where do we see him developing in the political map in Israel, if he does have any future? And the other is specifically about the Netanyahu corruption trials and how that will play out in the coming months. So I will, Nadav, please add your point, and then we'll immediately switch gears and to Tal. Perhaps you'll touch on those questions as we near the top of the hour.
So the Palestinians were indeed in dire straits. They felt completely deserted. Trump took everything from them. He said Jerusalem is off the table. He closed their office. He stopped supporting UNRWA, USAID, and then came with the Trump plan that has nothing to do with reality and no Palestinian partner. And then when they saw the UAE move and Bahrain, they were completely, but I think that they are now starting to understand that it was maybe, it wasn't exactly all bad. And I will explain, I will try to show why I think actually the Abrahamic Accords will work eventually for the Palestinians. First of all, there was a poll when it was still annexation or normalization, and 80% of Israelis preferred normalization to annexation. And eventually, the annexation was removed off the table. It was removed off the table from also other reasons that Kushner heard from the Jordanian, the Egyptians, everybody else, that they will not support the Trump plan with annexation. But that is a very important message, that annexation was not accepted by anyone except for the real hardline base of Netanyahu. Secondly, the Abrahamic Accords create a lever for Biden for peacemaking, because now Israelis have something to lose. The other way around, where it was, we get normalization if you'll be good to the Palestinians, didn't work. But now, when everybody are so excited about this new relations, people will not want to give it up, and there is a leverage that Biden can really work with. So actually, I think that this new Middle East that my boss Shimon Peres used to speak about is happening now. It's happening not because Trump and Netanyahu actually wanted a new Middle East. They actually wanted to avoid the Palestinians. But the reality will be that there will be a regional structure for the next time there will be a real, negotiations. And with this regional structure, it will be much, much more easier to reach something. Because if you remember, Camp David failed when Barack, Clinton, and Arafat met in Camp David, mainly because there was no regional plan. And Arafat could not make a decision about refugees, about Jerusalem, about all those big issues without the support of the Arab and Muslim world. But now we have everything aligned, and I believe that it could really play tools for Biden when he and we will talk about priorities later probably, because it's true that it's not going to be priority, but I think that the Biden administration, by working with the interagency, not just the president that tweets what he wants to do, but actually a serious interagency, he will be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. So even if the priority is China or Iran, there will be people that will be dealing with the Israeli-Palestinian, and if the opportunity will come, Biden will be able to seize it, even if it's not the first thing on his agenda, and it is not the first thing on his agenda right now.
Thanks, Nadav. Tal, so can you just touch on two things relatively? I mean, we're getting close to the hour, so just specifically Gantz and the future of blue and white, and also the corruption trials.
I hope any of you can concentrate on anything that is going on here, because there's really scary photos coming out from the Congress. My heart is with you, my fellow Americans, because I love the Congress and I love United States. So it's really some worrisome times. As per Gantz, really the man has took all of the credibility that he got from more than million voters, 1.1 million voters that trusted him 3 times. The Amachane, how do you say, the peace camp, not the peace camp, but the left center camp, kind of united behind him, was really behaving. This camp never knew how to unite. Everybody stood behind his back, trusted him 3 times, and did not even for a minute thought that he is unworthy of the votes. And then he took everything and he just moved into Netanyahu's government. To his credit, I have to say the pandemic was back in March. There was a panic about the COVID. And, he thought that this is the right thing to do. And really, everybody told him, you can, if you want to support the government during a really emergency time, you can do it from the outskirts. You can be the Speaker of the Knesset and support him and help him, but do not enter to sit with him in a government. Everybody told him that. It was on the table. Everybody told him you're going to get cheated. There is no way around it. And he insisted. And it was clear a month later, it was already clear that Netanyahu has no plans to put the budget forward. This is crazy. The budget has been taken hostage for their own political situation and their own political interest of the prime minister. The country runs without a budget for 2 years now. People are unemployed. People that don't have, the military, the social workers, the teachers. Everybody needs the budget, and it's just crazy that we are running like that. Only because Netanyahu didn't want to have Gantz sitting as a prime minister for 18 months. So nobody's trusting Gantz anymore, and for good reason. I think probably he will not be I don't think he will run all the way to the end. I think he will step down. It's just a matter of time. Maybe he's trying to just, let the time pass, maybe save a bit of his own reputation. I mean, he was a chief IDF. I don't know if you saw him, if you met him. It's an incredibly impressive person, very nice, very gentleman. I was actually DC correspondent in Washington, D.C. when he was the military attaché. So I kind of knew him from military time. Such a great person, but made all of the wrong political decision. And he's not experienced enough. And it's time for him to just, to go home, I suppose.
So we're getting close to the end, and so I'm just going to wrap up. And I know that we are all distracted, probably all of us that are on this webinar, the speakers, by everything that's going on right now in the Capitol, which is incredibly concerning. And we see, the flames that Trumpism has fanned and continues to fan, dividing, our nation in the United States, and it's very troubling. I do hope that we can all look together towards a more hopeful future. We do hope that things will settle down soon, and we will see, of course, as I said in the beginning, that President-elect Joe Biden's Electoral College victory will be certified, and hopefully we will be brought into an era that, as Biden has stated, of unification and unity among the American people. And so that can't come soon enough. And we know there's also that same long fight ahead of us here in Israel to uphold those same basic tenets of democracy, and also around the world. So I share my thoughts with everyone in the United States, and those specifically in Washington, D.C., my colleagues and friends, to stay safe and stay at home, please. And I will also mention specifically about Israeli election updates. J Street has a Israeli election update that you can see a link in the chat to sign up for, and I encourage you to look for that in your inboxes. This provides a good summary of what happens here, what's been happening here and unfolding in Israel. And I thank everyone for tuning in. I thank you, Tal and Nadav, for being here today to talk about this timely subject while other timely matters are occurring in the background. And I wish us all easier and better days, or end to the day here, and the continued better day in the United States. So thank you everyone.
Thank you for having me, and keep safe and healthy.
Thank you, Tal. Yes.
Thank you, Adina. Thank you, all the participants.